Destiny of a Savior by Famous Fault. Chapter 6. Snow Wolves.
Potty asked Looney to go to the party. Potty loves Looney. Potty loves Looney.
Harry and Luna looked up at Peeves, who was hanging upside down from a chandelier, having just overheard Harry asking Luna to go to Slughorn's party. You know, just as friends. Rebecca had heard them too. No one ever noticed ghosts unless one went straight right in front of them. She had not even tried to listen in. She had just passed by. Nice to keep these things private, Harry sighed as Peeves did an attempt to zoom off.
Peeves!
Rebecca called out with stern tone. Harry and Luna turned to face her with expressions of surprise. Rebecca! Harry gasped. Rebecca ignored him. Instead, she looked at Peeves, who turned around with an alarmed expression on his face. He knew full well that his previous partner in crime was not to be played with.
Shut it! She snapped.
Peeves did as ordered, more out of fear than anything else. The fact that Rebecca had managed to burn the barriers and make the hourglasses explode had not escaped Peeves, and Rebecca knew it. The poltergeist hastily started to promise he would not tell anyone before turning around and fleeing as quickly as he could. Thank you, Harry said, looking at Rebecca with a frown. Rebecca gave him half a smile. Don't mention it. The truth was she really hoped they wouldn't. She had acted more on impulse than anything else. Peter would be hurt about the fact she had showed herself to Luna and Harry before she showed herself to him or Tracy. Without another word, she turned around and disappeared through the ceiling. Like Sir Nicholas had said, her humanity had returned quite a bit since the start of term, although the last couple of weeks the improvement had been very rushed. Had it not been for her obvious lack of smell, sense, and gravity, she could almost have fooled herself into believing that she was alive. I'm detached from my ka, she realized. She did not really understand how this could be a punishment worse than death. Then again, she had lost her ka the way she was supposed to lose it, rather than have it ripped out. Perhaps she did not live the full consequences. After all, she was dead. She made her way to the astronomy tower, knowing it would be deserted at this time of the day. It turned out that she was wrong. Someone was sitting on the balustrade, not leaning against it or with their legs between the pillars, no, on it. Rebecca was, however, not worried. This person was not affected by gravity. Mahad felt her coming. She knew that, but he did not turn to look at her. She sat down next to him on the balustrade. The height was staggering, but neither Rebecca nor Mahad paid it any attention. Being dead had its advantages. It also made that one felt very little fear. Another advantage was that she did not get wet when sitting down on something that was. The cold wind would have been biting had she been able to feel it. Everything looked cold and wet, and she did not like. Clouds were hiding the hilltops, and the black lake lay silently gray. During the summertime, the view from the astronomy tower could be breathtaking. In the pathetic attempt to winter Mother Nature had given them, it just looked depressing. She considered jumping off the tower, just for the hell of it. Just because it would fit the scenery. Mahad, however, kept her from doing so. He, too, had been looking at the view, his face, like usual, not displaying a single emotion. I miss the desert, he stated, saying the most personal thing Rebecca had ever heard him say. Me too, she whispered, and let her head hang. Mahad looked at her. Not quite the same desert. Rebecca shook her head. No, not quite the same, she agreed. Tell me about your desert. I saw some of it, but... He trailed off. Only if you tell me about yours, Rebecca said with a smile. Mahad nodded, saying nothing more, simply waiting for her to tell him. It's not really a desert. It's a huge valley surrounded by mountains. It is sand dunes, but not where I lived. Where I lived, there were salt pans and alluvial fans, but mostly cactus areas. That's a combination between gravel and sand, but pressed firmly together, so it feels like walking on rock. There grow several sorts of cactus, and there live a few types of lizards and such. Not much can live there. We lived outside Death Valley, but not too far away. It was a desert of rocks, mountains, and buttes. Mahad looked generally satisfied listening to her. Such differences, he said. The desert in which I grew up was just as heartless, yet soft. The sand could take whatever color the sun wanted it to, either a pale yellow to a burning red or murky brown. It constantly changed. It never rested, full of life. Here and there rocks created valleys or mountains, but it was mostly sand with here and there gravel plains. Egypt was only inhabitable along the Nile. Rebecca rested her head on her hands. They call the desert where I lived for Death Valley. Those who lived there were pretty much disregarded when they gave the valley the name. Death Valley is very much alive. It's funny that despite their differences, they are both called the deserts. People hardly care to see the differences between things they don't care for, Mahad said in a way which made clear that he had accepted that fact a long time ago. They can't really live there. Thus it's a desert, regardless of the differences. Rebecca frowned. That's not really true, actually. No one can really live on the North Pole or South Pole, but you won't ever hear anyone calling them deserts. I think they call them deserts because they aren't so incredibly warm. Mahad looked at her, his face still free of expression. What are those? The fact that Mahad did not know what the North or South Pole was brightened Rebecca's day. She had great fun describing the two continents to the awestruck magician. The concept of a desert, made of snow and ice, was not something Mahad could comprehend. He had already had a hard time dealing with the snow in the small amounts it had appeared at Hogwarts. What are you doing here anyway? She asked after they fell silent. Professor Slughorn wants me to come to his party, the man who was part shadow creature confessed. I do not want to go, but he did not even give me the chance to decline. Rebecca pressed her lips together, knowing full well that the magician would not appreciate it if she started laughing. Mahad looked at her with a dark glare, knowing precisely how she felt. Rebecca couldn't help herself anymore and burst out laughing, unable to stop. Mahad just kept glaring at her as Rebecca had the best laugh she had for several months. The thought of the seemingly emotionless magician attending one of Slughorn's horrifying parties was hilarious. There is apparently a vampire coming, Mahad added darkly. Rebecca went absolutely silent and looked at Mahad, who looked back at her with an expression witnessing of his dread and helplessness. That was it. Rebecca toppled backwards from the balustrade, writhing with laughter, feeling as if she would never stop. Had she been alive, she would have had a severe stomachache. Mahad made a frustrated gesture. You are no better than Mana or the Pharaoh, he complained. It took a while before Rebecca was able to get up again. When she had caught her unnecessary breath enough to be able to speak, she heaved herself up against the balustrade with her lower arms. Are you telling me that Atem actually had fits of laughter like these? She asked, incredulous. Mahad still had a displeased and dark look in his eyes, which Rebecca only found amusing. He nodded. Most definitely. Mostly because of me. Rebecca shook her head, still having trouble speaking. That's not possible. She had even more trouble getting that image in her head than she had with breathing. He's always so dark and serious. A tortured look passed over Mahad's face. It wasn't always like that. War and 5,000 years of darkness changes people. The silence that followed was heavy and unpleasant. Are you gonna go? Rebecca asked after they had sat next to each other in silence for several minutes. You could just not go. No one would be surprised. Mahad looked at her, visibly tempted. When he did not try to hide his emotions, his face gave away quite a bit. I don't know. It would be highly impolite. Just tell him you have something else to do, Rebecca suggested. I could cover for you. Not that I think it would even be necessary. People fear you. I'm going, Mahad said with an unhappy tone in his voice. He wanted to say something more, but Rebecca beat him to the point. It's just because of the vampire, isn't it? She teased. She liked teasing Mahad. He did not know how to deal with it. He glared at her. No, it is not because of the vampire. I've seen creatures far more impressive, which includes vampires' cause. Although it will be an advantage, people are more likely to stare at a vampire than at me. And that, Rebecca mumbled to herself. Mahad did, however, hear her, and it didn't exactly make him stop glaring. Now, tell me, are your eyes blue or gray? Blue, Mahad said, full conviction. How so? Rebecca shrugged. Just asking. Then started teasing him again. So who are you going to take? Begone, he muttered, not appreciating the teasing, and made a gesture at her as if to chase away a fly. His hand went through her shoulder. Rebecca chuckled. Sure. Perhaps I should say hi to Tracy before she leaves for Christmas holidays. With that, she let herself fall back again, this time making herself fall through the floor all the way to ground level. Now she'd go look for her friends. It would not be easy, but she had to do it. Cole had, all by all, had a great time at Hogwarts. That did not take away that when he walked through the barrier and saw his parents and brother waiting for him, he cried out with joy and ran to meet them. He received a warm hug from his mother and a pat on the back from his father. To Cole's surprise, he even received a hug from Theo. June was not pleased with all the attention and jumped down from Cole's shoulder when his mother hugged him. The Bengal received an angry glare from Aunt, who met his mother outside the barrier as well. June just looked back at him as if he was below her. "Do you know that kid?" his mother asked Aunt as she noticed their angry staring. "That's gonna get them! It's a monster in disguise!" Aunt assured her. Cole broke away from his brother's short hug and looked at Aunt with a disapproving expression. "June is not a monster," he said, his tone indicating that he had already said that too often the last couple of months. Theo started laughing and bent down to pet the cat. "June is part of the family. How could she be a monster?" As his hand touched her striped and spotted fur, June decided to prove him wrong. Without a second thought, she lifted a claw and attacked the approaching hand. Aunt started to laugh in his turn. "I warned you!" Theo looked at his little brother with a sad expression on his face. "I'm sorry, Cole, but I'll have to agree with him." Cole lifted the cat in his arms, making the Bengal purr her appreciation, and whispered words as "arrogant and traitor." Then he looked back up again and wished Aunt and his mother happy holidays. As they sat down in the car, Theo smiled and leaned towards his brother. "I hope you realize you'll have to tell us everything." Cole smiled meekly. He had feared as much. Cole's mom started with asking questions about Aunt. "Is he a friend of yours?" "Yes, I get along really well with Aunt, but we're not the least alike. He's much bolder than I am, but he never thinks before he does something." Cole petted the cat laying on his lap. "And he really dislikes June." "Did you make any more friends?" she asked with a smile. "There are some students in my house who are pretty nice. Luna Lovegood and Peter Lepard were the ones to welcome me during the feast at the beginning of term, but they're loners. Mostly they are dandy in my year in house." Naturally, that led to a lot of questions about the houses, and that in its turn led to a whole lot of other questions. He was asked about teachers, classes, Hogwarts itself, and every question between heaven and earth they could imagine to have anything to do with the wizarding world and especially Hogwarts. The mood was good, and Cole decided not to spoil it by telling his parents in how much danger he actually was. He was quite frankly a bit scared, but like McGonagall had said, Hogwarts was the safest place at the moment. There was one other thing he did not say. He said absolutely nothing about Yugi or Rebecca. He did not know why, but something was telling him not to. Professor Majichan had clearly stated that if they had a, to put it simple, gut feeling, then they'd better listen to it. Professor Majichan's classes were awesome. In Cole's opinion, that was. Many were troubled by his teaching more than fascinated. He thought the magicians were far more interesting than wizards, and he wished he could learn to use outer magic. The possibilities would be unlimited. Nearly unlimited. Professor Majichan had clearly stated that outer magic would refuse to destroy a living being. Almost all forms of dark magic could not be accomplished using outer magic. Not that Cole minded that. He spent a lot of his time with Theo during the Christmas holidays. Theo was disappointed to learn that Cole was not allowed to use magic outside the school since he had hoped to see some tricks. The entire house felt different. Cole noticed after a couple of days it was free from worries, and that made it feel so much better. Together they watched classic Christmas movies, decorated the Christmas tree, while Cole eagerly told them about the 12 trees Hagrid always brought to Hogwarts, and even made Christmas dinner together. They had invited Cole's uncle, but he was in Canada for his work and couldn't get away. For once, his mother had bought lots of candy, which was placed in bowls a little throughout the house. Cole was pretty sure he was having the best Christmas ever. On Christmas morning, loads of presents were laying under the tree for all of them. Cole had gotten them all from Weasley's wizard Wheezes, a choice he was rather pleased with. That morning, a low sound came from beneath the tree, and June was hissing and the package wrapped in purple. Another low sound came from beneath the tree, sounding almost like a mouse. Then June attacked the package. "No, June!" Cole had yelled when he found out, interrupting their large, luxurious breakfast. He stood up hastily and chased the cat away. Most of the wrapping was gone, but the box was still intact. Cole lifted the fairly small package and brought it to the breakfast table. "Well, I think you better open your present for me now, before June rips it apart. Be careful, though." Cole's mum looked a bit surprised, but she did not protest. Carefully, she opened the box, noticing both the holes and the mouse-like sounds, which were making her look rather distrustful. She looked down in the box and frowned. "What is it?" She lifted it onto the box with both hands, showing them a big furball, which had gone silent. "A pink Karibo," Theo joked, and Cole laughed. Their father grinned too, but their mother did not understand and decided to disregard the joke. "It's a pygmy puff," Cole explained. "It's an extremely cuddly and easy pet." Beady black eyes looked out from a pink face, staring at Missy, who was not quite sure what to think. Cole could understand that Fred and George had trouble breeding them fast enough. Even he found them adorable. "Adorable!" Theo said, and Cole had to hold back his laughter. He had never heard his brother use that word before. It said a lot about the effects pygmy puffs had on people. "They object to nearly nothing and are extremely tame. In addition to that, they are scavengers, eating everything from insects to leftovers. When they are satisfied, they hum slightly." Cole's mother did not take her eyes off the silent pygmy puff, who was laying still in her hands, but Cole saw she listened closely. She broke off a bit of bread and handed it to the pink pygmy puff, who nibbled on it lazily. When it was gone, it started humming and closed its eyes. Missy smiled at her son. "Thanks a lot, Cole." Theo crossed his arms. "There is no doubt that you'll give the most awesome presents this year. You know, I think I'm done with breakfast." Cole's father raised an eyebrow. "Really? You haven't eaten anything yet. I think we could do it simultaneously." Cole's mom looked shocked, and everyone expected her to protest. Then her expression softened. "Oh, fine." Cole and Theo quickly moved all the presents to the dining room, and Missy insisted on giving her present to Cole first. The pygmy puff, which to that point went unnamed, had nestled itself on his owner's shoulder and had clearly fallen asleep, still humming slightly. "You know," she said, and handed him the rectangular package, "I might not understand it, but I can see it, and that's enough. Open it." Cole frowned, not understanding what his mother meant in the least. Instead, he did as she told him to and opened the gift. Just as with the present he had given his mother, the cardboard did not leave a single clue as to what it could be. He opened it and pulled the object out. Theo recognized it before Cole. "That's an original!" he called out, baffled. Then Cole recognized it too. It was Kaiba Corporation's first edition dual disc, carefully wrapped up in plastic. Cole had never realized how heavy those things were, several kilos at least. His respect for the duelists grew. How did one carry around something like that all day? "This is not just a replica of the first dual discs. This one is among the first ones made, one which was left to those given to the Battle City duelists. I thought you'd like it," Missy said with a shrug. Cole himself would not have been able to think of a better gift. He hugged his mum and whispered 1,000 thank yous. He would take the gift with him when he returned to Hogwarts. He did not care that electronics did not work there. Perhaps, if he asked Professor Flitwick, they'd be able to find a way to make it work anyway. "Well, then I think Theo can open his gift from me too," Cole's mother said, and handed Cole's older brother a package looking much the same. Even in that one was a dual disc. The differences weren't overly obvious, but when one looked closer, it was quite clear that Theo's was a newer version. "Thanks, Mum," Theo said happily. Then he turned to Cole. "I hope you realize that this is a challenge." Cole grimaced. He'd lose, and they both knew it. That was, however, not the problem he was thinking of. "We don't have enough space here." "Then we'll do it outside at the playground," Theo said, as if playing duel monsters in the winter outside was not the least of a problem. They both knew that one could not hold a hand with cards with gloves on. Cole decided not to say anything at all. Cole gave his father an AV automobile. His father had at first looked at the little toy car with distrust. Not an ungrounded distrust either. The car drove by itself over the table, all the way to the edge, but it did not stop. It drove on through the air. It went higher and higher until it was zooming around their heads. Then it parked on top of the refrigerator. Bud started to laugh. It was the most wonderful toy he had ever received. "The spell will eventually wear off, but it should last at least a year," Cole explained as the car was flickering with its lights on top of the refrigerator before zooming to the cabinets and in between the herbs, knocking over pots with cinnamon, pepper, basilica, and other things of which Cole did not know the name. He, in his turn, got, oddly enough, a beginner's magician's kit, so that he could learn different tricks. "I figured that since you're not allowed to do magic outside school, you can do this while you're here." Cole laughed, understanding the connection, regardless of how odd it seemed. He actually thought it to be quite considerate. Cole gave his older brother a headless hat. To the naked eye, it looked like a normal brown wizard's hat, perhaps slightly battered, but otherwise perfectly normal. Theo lifted his knife at it. "Is it dangerous?" Theo's tone was sarcastic, but Cole noticed a hint of genuine worry. "Just put it on," Cole sighed, annoyed. Theo slowly did as Cole told him, and once the hat was properly on his head, Missy screamed out in horror. "Cole," a voice said from seemingly nowhere, "what's the point with this hat?"
Theo?
Cole's mom asked, alarmed.
Are you okay?
"Well, wouldn't I be?" Theo asked, clearly annoyed by the fact that he was the only one who did not understand what was going on. "Go look in the mirror, son," Bud ordered. He also looked slightly pale. One could see Theo's headless body stand up and walk towards the bathroom. Cole understood his parents' reactions just fine. Had he not known the effects of the hat, he would have reacted similar. "This is so cool!" they heard Theo call out from the bathroom. "It's just an illusion," Cole told his parents soothingly. His mother nodded, still looking alarmed. Theo gave Cole a pack of cards and smiled at him, since I know you refused to use Yugi Mato's cards. He didn't say more. They did duel that day, out in the snow. They even finished it, although Cole's fingers felt quite undercooled when they got home. It had been visible that Theo's duel disc was better by the way its holograms looked and moved. Their actions were faster and more realistic than Cole's, but Cole loved his duel disc just the way it was. He was sure that it was the best Christmas he had ever had. The only thing that bothered him was the nagging voice telling him that he had lied to his family about the place he now proudly called his school. The house was packed with all the family and friends who were staying with him over Christmas, which included Dean and his mother. During the last year or so, Dean and Tracy's mother had developed a certain liking to each other, which, in Tracy's opinion, was based on the fact that they now finally had found someone to discuss their children with. It was something neither of the two had been able to do with their other girlfriends. Neither of the two seemed to mind that their children had something going on with each other. Tracy was not quite sure about her father's attitude towards all of it, but he did not complain. Not that it meant much. Not that it had to mean much. At the moment, he was taking out his annoyance over Tracy's cousins, who were making fun of him because of his Scottish accent. They ran away yelling and laughing, not the least bothered by his murky mood. Her dad liked saving people. He did not like to mingle with them. In his opinion, there were far too many people in the house. Dean and Tracy both agreed. The aftermath was that the three of them often played poker and other games in her parents' guest-free bedroom. It was the day of Christmas Eve that someone knocked on their door. They had not been expecting any more visitors, so the overall reaction was surprise.
I'll go open,
Tracy said, and stood up from her place at the fireplace when she had been listening to one of her uncle's colorful stories. The person that faced her looked, well, actually not much like a person. His eyes proved of severe sleep deprivation and a sinister personality. Tracy automatically backed away when her slightly more sensitive nose caught his rather horrible scent. This man had not seen a shower for a very long time, and if the scent did not prove it, his extremely dirty hair and face did. He had a long patched coat and muddy boots. It took Tracy all by all 2 seconds to recognize why this man was at their door. He was a werewolf, too.
Who is it?
Tracy's mother called from the kitchen, where the first scent of Christmas dinner was approaching from.
No one special. I'll be out a while.
Tracy knew how her mother would interpret those words. She jumped to the wrong conclusions and assumed it was one of Tracy's friends from Hogwarts, the kind she could not explain to her family. The grim expression of the somewhat frightening man did not change. Instead, he turned around and walked away, convinced that Tracy would follow. Tracy would. She knew that very well. It was the first time she had met someone like her since her transformation. They walked quite a bit in silence, and Tracy made sure to note her surroundings so she could get home. "How's school?" the man suddenly asked with a raspy voice.
What?
Tracy asked, taken aback by the sudden question. She had absolutely no idea why the question was relevant to anything. "Surprises me that they have not thrown you out yet," the man scoffed. "Though it's not far from, is it?"
I don't know what you mean,
Tracy said with a frown, and stopped walking. She started to doubt if this had been a good idea, yet she had been curious. "Still sleep in the dormitories? I'm sure it's great fun with all your girlfriends," he mocked with a raspy laugh. Clearly, he was amused by her.
They don't want me there,
Tracy admitted and cast a worried glance at the sky. It'd start snowing soon. Snowing a lot. All the amusement disappeared from the other werewolf's face. "Exactly. They shun you, don't they, Knight?" Tracy wouldn't. They did shun her. There were 1,000 examples. Umbridge's reaction on her alone had been horrible enough. But nearly the entire school did so. The teachers had little problem with her. At least not one had refused to teach her. Among the students, it had been more obvious. It weren't only the Slytherins who did not want anything to do with her. The major part of the students avoided her, younger students as well as older. So did their parents, if the amount of howlers was anything to go by. "I thought so," he said, and put a hand on her shoulder. "Wizards will never accept us. They'll always see us as inferior, as if we are not worthy of even their presence. There will come a time when they will hunt us down to extinction." Tracy shook her head, not able to even comprehend his words. She could only agree with him on his first words, but those last... Surely they wouldn't do such a thing. No, it was impossible. "Don't be so naive," he called out and shook her gently. "Has no one tried to do away with you yet?" The fact was that people had. Poisoned male, Umbridge, and students had pulled nearly deadly pranks on her. There was reason as for why she slept in a room which could not be found by someone who wasn't welcome. She nodded. "I have." She looked at the ground. "I know the feeling," he said kindly. "Just look at me. I've been thrown away from our society, and this is the aftermath. I can't even get a decent shower." He smiled a bit, flashing a row of surprisingly white teeth. One of the few advantages of being a werewolf, perfect teeth. The only people we can rely on are those like us. Other werewolves can be our only friends. Tracy did not agree, but she was far too spellbound by the man's words to interrupt him. She listened, fascinated to him, yet so far, nearly all his words had been true. "We live underground. A society created of merely werewolves. It still has some flaws, but we're working on them. And under Greyback's leadership, most of us have now a life better than anything we've ever had before. We have to create a better life for ourselves. No one else will do it for us." Tracy still shook her head, not because she did not believe him, but since it was a lot to take in. She noticed a slight triumphant look in the man's sinister eyes, but did not understand his meaning. "How are you doing that?" she asked. Then the man made a mistake. He had gotten too eager, thinking he had already convinced her. "You know who has promised us a better life. Under his rule, we will no longer need to steal just to get something to eat. We ate his side in this war. We can have a revenge on those that suppress us." Tracy looked up, her eyes cold and hard. She shook his hand of her. "No," she growled. "I've already lost a faithful friend to him. I will never aid him. I'd rather live suppressed by the wizarding world with a few true friends by my side than to serve under the Death Eaters. Don't tell me they don't suppress you." "Those friends don't care for you. As soon as they realize what everyone else thinks of you, they'll turn away from you. You can only rely on your own kind." He sounded slightly desperate, realizing his mistake. "They already know," she snarled, sounding like the predator she sometimes was. "My parents never stopped loving me. I have friends unmatched by any others, and I even have a boyfriend who stands up for me, with me. I've seen things you can't imagine. Bonds stronger than anything you ever possible. Bonds that convince me that in the end, my condition doesn't really matter as long as I stay true to who I am." She couldn't help herself from shuddering a bit as she thought about the Department of Mysteries and the things that had happened there. Professor Muto and Atem had taught her more in that hour than anything had her entire life. "Never!" she yelled, taking a step forward, and was intimidating enough to make him take a step back. "I won't join your ridiculous gathering of insane hounds!" He hit her straight over the face. She fell to the ground due to the force of the impact, scraping up her elbows and knees. "Fool!" he snarled and turned away. "And that for a Slytherin! I'll see you some more!" Had Tracy been standing up, she probably would have considered doing the same thing as he had just done to her. She did, however, not argue with him, knowing it wouldn't lead anywhere. Instead, she just stood up again and watched him walk away. She was surprised he had not harmed her further. It would have been wise, since she openly had refused him. Instead of dwelling too much in the snow, which had begun to fall softly, she turned around to head home, knowing full well that the snow could blow up into a blizzard in a matter of seconds if she had bad luck. They used to have an abundant amount of snow here, and she could only expect it to increase. Wishing she had taken a jacket, she jogged home, but was soon caught up in something resembling a snowstorm. Fighting against the wind and snow, she finally came home, moving no faster than snail pace. Her mother opened the door before Tracy even had the time to knock. She was pulled in and scolded in a friendly way when her mother saw how she looked. "You know how the weather changes around here. You should have been more cautious." "I'm fine, Mom," Tracy assured her. The fact was that she was far from it. She was pretty sure the werewolf had not given up yet, if his words were anything to go by. She was probably in deep trouble. She would, however, not inform every single person in the house about that little issue. As she was now the center of attention, she decided to keep shut. The incident was quickly forgotten by the people in the house, and although Tracy could tell Dean knew something was wrong, he did not bring it up. They ate Christmas dinner together, the lot of them, all enjoying the cooking of various people in the house. It was a wonderful mood. It just was that Tracy could not really be a part of all the happiness, worried as she was. After dinner, most people left. That was after helping them clean away and everything. Some were more willing to go than others, and Tracy almost threw the last people out.
Are you going to tell us what happened now?
Dean asked curiously. Tracy nodded gravely. She sat down in the living room, accompanied by her parents, Dean and Dean's mother. Dean's mother had followed deliberately, but Tracy had nodded at her, letting her know that it was okay for her to be a part of it. She told them what had happened, and although her mother did not panic, she turned a worrisome shade of white.
You know who is trying to recruit you?
Her father asked with a deep scowl, his tone not giving anything away. Tracy shook her head.
The werewolves are, and Voldemort is recruiting werewolves. I don't think he cares who the werewolves are, but the werewolves do. You'd be a great advantage to them. You are the werewolf of Hogwarts, after all,
Dean said, he too with a deep scowl. Tracy nodded.
It was scary. He was pretty convincing. Had he not mentioned Voldemort, I might not have turned him down the way I did. What matters is that you did turn him down,
her mother said firmly,
and that we know where they stand. Did you know about the werewolves?
Both Tracy and Dean shook their heads. No one had informed them about werewolves. They had been warned for inferi, but not werewolves.
If no one knew, then this is valuable information,
Dean said, and looked at Tracy.
They'll try to keep you silent. And you too,
Tracy confirmed, looking at the people around her.
We're not part of your world. They will not care for us,
Tracy's father said.
True.
Dean and Tracy exchanged a glance.
It's highly likely,
Dean confirmed, and Tracy nodded.
Then you two have to get out of here before they make a move,
Tracy's father continued and crossed his arms.
The sooner the better. Is Hogwarts still the safest place?
With Dumbledore, yes, but we can't return now. They'd expect that,
Tracy said.
I want to find Professor Lupin. I know he can help with this issue.
Dean looked at her thoughtfully.
It's a good idea, but how are you going to find him? You can ask an owl, but that will take too long.
Tracy nodded.
I've thought about it. I think I know, actually, but it is something I'll have to do alone. I have to do it in here.
What? Why? Her mother asked, confused, and she frowned. Are you up to something dangerous?
No, not this time.
Tracy had told her parents what had happened in the Ministry of Magic, a slightly censored version, but still, her mother's frown grew.
I just made a promise not to reveal the involvement, and I intend to stick with that promise.
You are growing up too fast, Dean's mother said, not only to Tracy, but to both of them.
Or can do such a thing.
Dean sighed. He had a vague idea who she'd take contact with, but he couldn't be sure. I think I'll leave you to it. Have you got what you need? Tracy nodded in silent reply and was grateful that he understood. She was just slightly worried he understood too much. After her parents left, she walked to the fireplace. She sat down on her knees and spoke loudly and clearly.
Severus Snape's office,
and threw the green powder in the flames. Then she ducked with her head first. 10 minutes and a tense conversation later, she withdrew her head from the flames. Professor Snape had promised to inform Dumbledore about the werewolves' movement. He had also, albeit a bit deliberately, told her the whereabouts of Remus Lupin. She was a bit surprised to learn that he was at the burrow. She found the rest in the kitchen.
Found him,
she stated, and sat down on the long since cleared table.
He's at the burrow.
The burrow? Dean asked her, confused. The rest hadn't even bothered asking, knowing they'd probably not understand it anyway.
That's where Ron and Ginny live, she explained. Apparently there are a lot of people there this time of year. It is past midnight, her mother said, and looked at the clock above the door. It's too late to contact them now.
Tracy shook her head.
The burrow is in Britain. Thus it is 2 hours earlier there. There it is just past 10. We should not delay, though.
Are these people trustworthy?
Her father asked, looking at her with a cautious gaze.
The Weasleys are on our side,
Tracy said, full conviction.
We can't doubt our own in times like these. Ron and Ginny fought with us in the Department of Mysteries. Fred and George were the ones who took care of me after I was abused, and they teamed up with Rebecca.
Tracy's voice faltered for a moment when she mentioned her dead friend, but she pretended it hadn't.
We can trust the Weasleys. The question is if we are welcome.
Tracy's wounds had been reopened when Rebecca had finally shown herself the day of Slughorn's party. It had been late afternoon, and Tracy had been on her way to the room of requirement when she had seen Rebecca stand there. Their conversation had been brief and tear-free, but it was also far from finished. It had, however, been enough for Tracy to once again feel the tearing weight of the loss.
We have the means to find out, her mother stated, dragging Tracy back to the present. The living room again? Tracy and Dean stood up, followed by the three adults. Tracy sat down on her knees just outside the fireplace once again, took some flue powder, and threw it in the flames. They turned a vivid green, and Tracy exchanged a short glance with Dean before ducking into the flames for the second time that day. The first thing she noticed when her head surfaced in the kitchen's fireplace was a loud, high voice, a singing one at that, and she wished she could cover her ears. It would not surprise her if a group of banshees were aiding the singer. Tracy decided to ignore the singing and find people instead. The kitchen was empty, and she wondered if she should simply shout out at the voices coming from the living room. Just as she was about to yell out Ron or Ginny's name, them being the ones she was sure to know in the house, she heard shuffling from the living room. Someone was already coming. It was Fred, George, and Ginny who entered the kitchen, diving into the cupboards for some Christmas sweets.
Excuse me,
Tracy said, calling them to attention. The twins and Ginny started in surprise as they noticed the face in the flames.
Merlin, Tracy, you scared me,
Ginny called out as George went to alert the rest.
Do you know you have a large bruise on your face?
Tracy chuckled.
I reckon I do.
Then she went quiet as she saw all the people walk into the kitchen. George came back with two people who she recognized to be Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. Someone she suspected was one of the older brothers holding an arm around Fleur de Guerre, someone Tracy remembered from the Triwizard Tournament, and Ron accompanied to Tracy's surprise by Harry. Lastly, Professor Lupin came in, the person she had been looking for. Professor Snape had told the truth. "Who are you?" Mr. Weasley asked, suspicious, pointing his wand at her. She could not blame him. In times like these, no one could be careful enough.
Tracy Davis, she said silently,
shy at all the attention. "Prove it," Mr. Weasley said with a grim expression.
Dad! Ginny protested. Oh no, Ginny!
"He's right, Ginny. We cannot be careful enough," Professor Lupin said. Tracy thought for about 3 seconds before she could come up with something that would prove it was her.
I have the most luxurious bedroom in all of Hogwarts and am the only Slytherin to have ever attended a DA meeting since Professor Muto told me to go to the Hog's Head.
"That's her," Harry confirmed, and Ron, Fred, George, and Ginny nodded in confirmation. Then Ginny blinked.
Was that Professor Muto's doing?
Ron just nodded.
I'm not surprised,
Ginny sighed. "What's your business?" Mr. Weasley said, only slightly more friendly.
I was looking for Professor Lupin, she said. I need his help.
"I'm here," the warm man said. It was clear that he would not ask anyone to leave. What she'd tell him, the rest would hear. Tracy was fine with that.
I was visited today by a werewolf,
Tracy said, cutting to the point. She saw the troubled look on Professor Lupin's face appear at once. He didn't, however, not say anything, just listened.
He wanted me to join an underground community of werewolves led by Fenrir Greyback.
Professor Lupin wasn't able to hold still any longer. He almost looked panicked. "What did you do?"
I listened to him, she said, not feeling like hiding anything or making it any bigger. Then he told me that they aided Voldemort.
Several people in the room winced at the name.
I got angry at him, told him I'd never fight on the side of the people who killed my friend. He called me for a fool and said I hadn't seen the last of him yet.
Professor Lupin slumped down on a chair. "You're brave but foolish. You've put yourself in grave danger. Greyback has a special interest in you, the Hogwarts werewolf, the first to ever attend the school, while the nature of your condition is known. Now you have to fight him. He will try to do away with you, even if it is just to silence you on this information."
We figured as much. That's why I came looking for help, Tracy said, her eyes cast to the ground.
"We?" Mr. Weasley asked, his hostile tone completely gone.
"Me and Dean," Tracy clarified.
"You can't stay where you are, neither of you,"
Mrs. Weasley said, horrified, confirming what Tracy had already known. Professor Lupin nodded in agreement. "I'm glad you came to me with this information. However, the Flu Network is not safe. We'll have to talk more face to face."
They can stay here, can't they?
Ginny asked, looking at her mother. She'd gotten to know both Tracy and Dean quite well through Peter and Rebecca, and although they weren't best friends, the two enjoyed each other's company.
"I wouldn't have it any other way. Horrible times, children being chased away from their homes by werewolves,"
Mrs. Weasley said in a soft motherly tone.
"No offense, Remus. Not you either, Tracy."
"None taken," Professor Lupin said, and Tracy nodded in agreement. "Molly, I'm not sure if it will fit," Mr. Weasley said carefully. Mrs. Weasley turned to her husband with fire in her eyes.
"This is not about having or not having room for 2 more visitors. This is about making sure 2 children, Arthur, are safe from those who will try to kill them. I will not sleep at night if I'm not sure they are alive and well."
Tracy was shocked, and she would not deny it, touched. Clearly, her shock showed on her face. Mom is pretty awesome, you know, George said with a wink. You're right, honey. Of course you are, Mr. Weasley said, and gave his wife a kiss on the forehead before turning to Tracy. His tone was soft. We will gladly welcome you and Dean to our home for the duration of the Christmas holidays. Tracy knew better than to question if it really was okay. She was offered a helping hand. Now she really should take it.
Thank you. We will inform our parents and gather our stuff.
We expect you no later than an hour from now, Mr. Weasley said warningly. Tracy withdrew from the flames and informed Dean and the adults about the brief conversation. Quickly, they packed their trunks, not bothering with anything they didn't really need. They were done in half an hour. They said goodbye to their parents, and Dean was told 100 times to be careful. Tracy's parents just told her they believed in her and that they'd see each other soon again. Tracy knew that what they were doing was slight self-deception, since there was no guarantee they'd see each other again at all, but it was the only way. Then they went through the fireplace, first Dean, closely followed by Tracy. The music had disappeared, and Ron, Harry, the twins, Professor Lupin, and Mrs. Weasley were waiting for them. The rest were nowhere to be seen. Mr. Weasley entered just a minute after they arrived. Professor Lupin and Harry had been in a hushed conversation when Dean and Tracy interrupted their talking by appearing from the fireplace. Well, Mum, Fred said, and threw Tracy a look. Now we've done it. We have a Slytherin in our home. One that eats at the Gryffindor table, Harry said soberly, making Fred's grin disappear. Interesting, Mr. Weasley said. We were all planning on going to bed. Molly will show you to your rooms. Tracy, you'll share Ginny's room along with Fleur. They're probably still waiting up for you, and Dean, you'll have to fit yourself in with Ron and Harry. Tracy nodded gratefully and did her best to suppress a yawn. Her inner clock was still yelling at 2 in the morning rather than midnight. Dean had the same problem. Sorry, jet lag, he explained when he was unable to hide how tired he was. We'll talk some more in the morning, Professor Lupin said. I think it is best for all if we get some sleep, so we can at least be awake at Christmas morning. Tracy was doubtful if she would enjoy Christmas morning, but she decided, however, that a bed she would enjoy, especially now that she was sure that she could sleep safely without having to worry about being eaten by her own.